Henry gets treated like the literal spawn of hell sometimes, for the most bollocks reasons.
Don't be horrid, Henry. Just look at Peter's face. And my floor. This time you have gone too far, Henry. You stay in here until I say you can come out.
But what if Henry gave up on trying to be a decent kid and instead becomes the embodiment of what everyone thinks he already is? Today, we're taking a look at what would happen if Henry became truly as horrid as we know he can be. If you know anything about Horrid Henry, you know that things tend to follow a pretty f***ing stupid path. Henry wants something, and usually everyone and their bloody grandma decides to stand in his way. He tries his hardest to get what he wants, and eventually gets into trouble, and gets punished for it. Sounds like the average life of a lot of kids if you really think about it. And that's not too surprising, since it's a cartoon that thousands of kids all rush to catch on CITV. The whole point of Horrid Henry is that Henry is the relatable little goblin every child secretly wants to be. He acts up in every way possible, and you laugh because he's doing all the cool shit that we imagine doing as kids.
Operation Halloween, over and out.
Weirdly enough though, even though the show's named after him, he doesn't always get to win. At least not really. Sure, he gets the candy sometimes, and occasionally he gets his way over his parents, but at the end of the day, it really just is not fair. And on that totally not planned name drop, that's where we come in. We're going to take a hypothetical look at what exactly Henry could accomplish if he really stopped holding back and went bloody horrid. We mean silly Simon and fuming Francesca getting child protective services called on them kind of horrid. But first, we need to establish what Henry is actually working with, because people genuinely underestimate this kid, and it's one of the biggest mistakes you can make when watching the show. The show sometimes makes you want to think that Henry's nothing but some screaming brat who just wants to get spoiled by his parents and be left alone to be a lazy bum. But truth be told, this kid is f***ing smart, and we mean that genuinely. This prepubescent British kid pulls off some of the most impressive schemes I've ever seen in a kids show. Like that one time he altered his test results on Miss Oddbod's computer and got himself entered into a brain box competition.
If I'd finished the test, I would have got a much better mark. Yeah, that's more like it.
Oh, I don't know. Why would anybody be scared of a silly thing like this?
And he's not wrong either. He definitely would have gotten a better grade on the test if he was allowed to finish it. We've seen the kinds of things he's capable of if he really puts his mind to it. He also founded and runs the Purple Hand Gang, set up a physical headquarters, a ranked leadership structure, 2 original songs, and a band called the Zero Zombies.
When nothing's going right, everything's going wrong. I close my bedroom door.
Keep in mind, he's also formally titled Lord High Excellent Majesty of the Purple Hand Gang, which, yes, is absolutely ridiculous, but allow the kid to dream for a moment. So he basically understands that if you want people to follow you, you give them a hierarchy to belong to. That's an impressive level of leadership for someone that's his age. But enough about how smart Henry can be. If you actually sit down and count all of the tricks he's pulled, we'd be here for a while. A good example is one where he literally stole Peter as a servant to raise money.
Okay, who fancies their very own servant for the weekend? Yours for just 75p a day, or a bargain at £1.50 for 2 days.
What did he do?
Anything you want.
That, honestly, should be a crime in itself. Like, how the hell could he sell his brother for £1.50? If anything, he should have charged way more than that. And what are you gonna do? Sentence a child for child labour? Like, that'd ever work. Anyway, we're getting off topic. So when we ask what happens if Henry stops operating as he usually would and fully embraces his horror side, the answer is genuinely a little bit worrying. Let's start where Henry spends most of his time being miserable. Ashton Primary. In the show, Henry's school career is basically an endless battle of who can get what they want between him and Miss Battleaxe, with occasional cameos from Mr. Soggington and Miss Oddbod. Henry never does his homework. He talks back and gets detention so many times that Soggy Sid has probably got a dedicated chair with Henry's name on it. But here's the thing, Henry's schemes at school are almost always reactive. He's responding to something that he thinks is unfair, and the chaos is usually a solution to an immediate problem rather than a long-term project. Now, let's imagine him being actually horrid. And Actually, Horrid Henry, working with that tactical brain of his, does not just mess about in individual lessons. He goes bigger because he's demonstrated on multiple occasions that he understands how institutions work well enough to manipulate them. He already hacked Miss Oddbod's computer, and that was just for grades. Now, what else do you think he'd do when he actually has a reason to use it properly? Every teacher's schedule, every planned exam. He'd know every single thing. Hell, maybe he'd also subscribe to Miss Oddbod's account for the Not Fair channel. Who knows? Miss Battleaxe thinks she's springing a surprise spelling test on a Thursday morning. Meanwhile, Henry has known about it since Tuesday and has spent Wednesday crafting the perfect plan to get it cancelled and make sure she takes the blame. He doesn't even need to sit the test. He just needs to understand cause and effect well enough to set the right dominoes falling. And then there's the uniform episode, where Henry figured out that because the school blazers all looked identical, he could move around the building freely without teachers being able to pin him down.
Whose ball is that? Ah, Henry.
That is a kid who looked at a system, found the gap in it, and walked straight through without being caught. Quite literally in this case, to be honest. I think he's got a future in cybersecurity. And finally, Miss Battleaxe would not last a term. She's arguably the only person in that school who takes Henry even slightly seriously as a threat. But up against a Henry who's decided there are no rules, she's completely outmatched because all of her powers come from the institution backing her up. Strip that away and she's just a woman with a very loud voice and a chalk-covered jumper. For example, when Henry managed to catch his favourite teacher in a very crucial moment. But unlike the original episode, where he and Ralph start using that private photo as a get-out-of-jail-free card, a truly horrid Henry would start a full-on assault. Sure, he'd probably mess around for a bit because Henry will always be Henry, but in the end, he'd proceed to post that picture on any spot that he can find in school. And just like that, Miss Battleaxe is too embarrassed and emotionally destabilised to run an effective classroom. Due to the embarrassment of everyone finding out, she forcefully quits from Ashton Primary, allowing Henry to act as he pleases. This is just the opener, and there's already so much that could go wrong. Because if we look at the family situation, it's not looking good, especially for Perfect Peter. In the show, Henry's home life follows a pattern that we've discussed a million times on this channel. He gets punished for things he may or may not have done. Peter snitches, Mum says, "Don't be horrid, Henry," approximately 9,000 times per episode, and Dad looks exhausted. Nothing ever actually changes.
No treats for you, Henry. Only good children deserve to go to the fun fair.
I've been good, Mum. Can I go?
Of course you can, Peter.
What? That's not fair!
And of course, Henry just goes along with it because he has no other choice and yells his signature, "It's not fair," into the heavens. Sure, if Henry was horrid, he'd refuse his parents' punishments. But if he was really horrid, he'd actually listen to them. Not because he'd want to find a chance to get back at them later, but to get back at the bloody snitch that is Peter.
But I always take them their juice.
Too late, Slowcoat.
Oh, you haven't put something horrible in it, have you, Henry?
No.
As if it weren't obvious enough, Peter is just as hungry for approval, like every clout chaser out there. If no one's there to constantly call him a good boy, he definitely loses his shit. And he's made it a habit to always point out whatever good deed he's doing, which is ridiculous.
Can I come with you, Dad? I love going to the supermarket.
Of course you can, Peter.
Basically, he's built his entire existence around being the opposite of Henry, which means Henry is the most important person in Peter's psychological universe, and frankly, the only thing that's making him good. So, the question is, what do you think will happen when Henry stops being visibly horrid at home? What happens when Henry starts behaving perfectly and beating Peter at his own game?
Mwah.
Peter kicked me!
Peter?
While Henry's out there playing 5D chess, Peter has absolutely no idea what to do, since no one praises him as the golden child anymore. He starts acting out to fill the vacuum because someone has to be bad between the both of them, and suddenly he's the only one getting sent to his room. Perfect Peter's horrid day has already given us a good example of what happens when Peter isn't showered with affection for his deeds.
Doesn't matter how perfect I am, nobody notices. But everyone notices how horrid Henry is. It's not fair!
And that was just for a bloody day. Imagine the horror that Peter would become after Henry switches the home dynamic for an entire week. It's funny because the entire setup that would happen would be just like the scenario we explored in our What If Horrid Henry Was Never Born video. Sure, a week might not sound long, but it's definitely long enough to make Peter genuinely crack. And also long enough for mum and dad to change their views of their kids, like the Muppets that they are. And then, once the ground has shifted, Henry goes back to normal, and Peter has no credibility left to spend. Every time Peter makes a report, Mum thinks about the week that Peter went mental, and she tells him, "Don't be putrid, Peter," in a tone much harsher than anything he's ever heard before. And yeah, thank you all for your naming idea from the previous video. The genuinely awful thing is that Peter would not recover from the way Henry recovers from being treated badly. Henry has built up years of scar tissue from being the scapegoat. He knows how to absorb unfair punishment and bounce back, which is probably the one thing this shitty upbringing has actually given him. Peter has never had to absorb anything. Peter's whole personality is predicated on being protected, being praised, being the only one who doesn't get it. Put him in the path of a Henry who stops holding anything back, and Peter breaks quickly and completely. But enough said about the state of Henry's household. Let's zoom out now, because the damage wouldn't stop at the front door. In the show, the Purple Hand Gang is the one thing that's going well for Henry. He and his group raid the secret club's treehouse and do whatever it is that kids do.
Don't be such a baby, it's only water. It's turbo-powered water!
It's wholesome for the most part, but it's also a group of kids with genuine loyalty to Henry. A leader who's shown he can plan and adapt under pressure. Think about what Henry has already built. There's Rude Ralph, Beefy Bart, Brainy Brian, and the others. And Henry as ruler of them all. But an actually horrid Henry probably wouldn't care about any one of them. If anything, he'd be more willing to keep them around, only because they're useful to him. So he'd rely on his members merely as tools, since he's more enticed by the fact that he's the ruler of the gang. And then there's Moody Margaret, leader of the secret club, and Henry's nemesis. And I swear that their rivalry is why they get out of bed every morning. This version of Henry decides that it's time to do some major damage. So instead of their fights that usually end in draws, Henry learns Margaret's routines thanks to all the raiding he's been doing, and learns the club's weakness, one of which is Susan. If you've seen her, you know that she's Margaret's loyal sidekick and perpetually one bad day away from ditching the secret club. He knows Susan is the weak link in the secret club because she's already betrayed Margaret and temporarily sided with Henry before.
Why didn't you pass the ball to me? Have you decided who you're taking to the game yet?
Of course, there's no way in hell Henry would walk up to her and hold out an invitation to the Purple Hand Gang. This is Henry we're talking about here. Rather, he'll carefully create the conditions for that switch by making Margaret more intolerable to be around, which is a very specific and achievable target. Here's what Henry knows about Margaret. She is pretty much a spoilt brat who cares about her appearance and being the most admired girl in the vicinity, and any threat to that sends her into a spiral. She also has a deeply established habit of blaming Susan for anything that goes wrong in the secret club, and it doesn't matter if Susan was having a nice tea time at home. This version of Henry would cook up a bad run of days for Margaret through every dirt method he can think of, and Margaret, being Margaret, doesn't question who might be responsible. She responds by doubling down on the bossiness and blaming Susan even more than usual. Susan, who has zero idea of anything as well, finally gets fed up with her best friend's attitude, so she finally leaves the club, or who knows, she could become a solid intel source for Henry and the Purple Hand Gang. And honestly, Henry would be more than glad, even though he'd pretend that the secret club is none of his business. Here's the thing though, a lot of people only know Henry from the usual show we all know and love. But hardly anyone pays attention to the monster that is Horrid Henry from the books. And honestly, who knows what they were feeding that kid? In the books, Henry has no guilt and no reset, like you see in the TV Henry, right? At least he's had his moments where he's had a heart.
Oh, thank goodness you've come. My possum's stuck up this tree and won't come down.
Dad.
But the book version of Henry, that dude is 100% a menace. A menace to society. In fact, you might as well start to doubt if TV and book Henry are even the same person. Now, you might be wondering, why did we bring this up? Well, that's a good question, because this version of Henry is probably the closest thing we have to a truly horrid Henry. He's actively tried to get rid of Peter, and that includes sending him through the mail and even tying him to a kite. He somehow spread his head lice to his classmates, which some would say is active biological warfare. And the list goes on. In general, he's more of a sociopath who couldn't give a fuck about anyone for the most part, but the TV show kept all of that energy contained. So, why didn't the show just commit? Why keep Henry an annoying kid rather than letting him become what the books sometimes suggest he could be? Because the show understood something that's easy to forget when you're watching it. Henry works as a character because he's not that bad. He works because there's a version of him that you can sympathize with, root for, and laugh alongside.
And so we can see from this fine young performer that traditional toys can bring the same pleasure, comics, and loud music, and in some cases may even replace them.
The moment he crosses into actually harming people without remorse, without that flicker of humanity underneath, he stops being Horrid Henry and starts being something that children's television is not equipped to handle. Basically, an actually Horrid Henry just wants two things: to do whatever he wants for the hell of it and get rid of anyone who'd oppose him, which all sounds like your regular evil villain's to-do list on a Tuesday morning. But at least he'd have a great head start if he were going off on that path. In fact, it definitely would have been an entirely different show, one where a lot of things would have gone wrong, and this little menace would become a catastrophe. But hey, it's just a theory. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe for more content like this, because you can bet we're always cooking up the craziest scenario at Not Fair Studios. Oh, and don't be horrid. Cheerio!